I am 76, and I no longer dream of much. When you are that age, dreams become shorter. My Sybil used to say that in old age, we only dream of waking up to another morning without joint pain. She laughed when she said that. She had a soft laugh like a muffled bell. Sybil passed away 2 years ago. On a November evening, she lay down to rest before dinner and never woke up. The doctors said it was her heart. It just stopped beating, like an old clock that someone forgot to give a new battery. That day I lost half of myself. We had lived together for 48 years. For 48 years, I woke up every morning and saw her face on the pillow next to mine. After the funeral, the house on Summit Boulevard became unbearably empty. I walked through the rooms listening to the echo of my footsteps. Sybil's things were everywhere. Her knitting needles on the chair, her unfinished book on the nightstand, her favorite mug in the cupboard. Sometimes I talked to her as if she could hear me, and then I caught myself answering myself in her voice. Quentin, our only son, suggested that I move in with him. "Dad, you can't live alone," he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Tanit and I have plenty of room. Why pay for a big house when you're alone?" And I agreed. Not because I wanted to, but because I had lost the strength to resist. When you lose your life partner, you first lose your compass. My house was sold in 2 weeks, my belongings were packed, and I moved to the suburbs of Spokane, to their two-story house overlooking the Spokane River. Quentin is a good boy. At least he was until he met Tanit. He is 44 and works as a network architect at a technology company. He's smart but soft-spoken. He's always been that way. Even as a child, he preferred to give in rather than argue. Sybil worried that people would take advantage of him because of this trait. She was right. Tanith is 9 years younger than him. They met 6 years ago at a corporate event where she was working as an event planner. Now she calls herself a corporate well-being consultant, whatever that means. All I see is that she spends a lot of time at home, talking on the phone and constantly reminding everyone how busy she is. The first few months after the move were tolerable. I was given a room on the first floor so I wouldn't have to climb the stairs. I had my own TV, bookshelf, and armchair, which had been moved from my old house. In the mornings, Quentin and I would have breakfast together before he left for work. Sometimes on weekends we would go fishing, just like in the good old days. But gradually I began to notice changes. At first they were small things. Tanit began to forget to call me for dinner. "Oh, Barnaby, I thought you had already eaten," she would say with that special smile that never reached her eyes. My room became a guest room that people would walk into without knocking to get something from the closet or show the house to their friends. "We're thinking of turning this room into a home gym," I heard once when Tanit was giving her friend a tour. "Of course, when it's free." They stood right outside the door, as if I weren't there, or as if I were a piece of furniture that would soon be taken away. Quentin was changing before my eyes. He used to call me every day, even when I lived separately. Now, living under the same roof, we could go days without talking. He began to avoid our breakfast together, leaving earlier and earlier. Fishing stopped after Tanit declared that it's unhygienic and cruel. Quentin, who had loved fishing since childhood, simply nodded and never suggested going to the lake again. "Quentin, how about we go to that new aviation museum on Saturday?" I asked one day at dinner, trying to regain some closeness. "We have plans for the weekend," Tanit replied before he could open his mouth. "We're going to Hazel and Dante's. They recently renovated their patio." "I wasn't asking you," I said, looking at my son. Tanit raised her eyebrows. "We're a family, Barnaby. We make plans together." Quentin buried his face in his plate, avoiding my gaze. After dinner, I tried to talk to him alone, but Tanit seemed to sense it. She didn't leave his side, and then dragged him off to their bedroom, citing a headache. 2 weeks after that incident, I overheard their conversation in the kitchen. It was late in the evening, and I went out to get a drink of water and stopped in the hallway when I heard my name. "Your father," Tanith said in a voice strained with irritation. "Do you have any idea how much it costs us to support him? We have our own plans, our own lives." "He's my father," Quentin replied quietly. "Where else can he go?" "To a nursing home. That's what they're for. He can afford a good one with his pension and savings." "I can't send him to a nursing home." "Can't or won't." Her voice rang with metal. "We're putting off renovations, a trip to Europe, a baby. All because half the house is taken up by your father. I quietly returned to my room, forgetting my thirst. Something tightened inside me at those words. Was I really such a burden? I always tried to be inconspicuous, to help around the house, even offered to pay part of the bills, but Quentin refused. Don't be silly, Dad, he waved me off. The next morning, I deliberately got up early to talk to Quentin before he left for work. But I found only Tanit in the kitchen, elegant even at 7 in the morning, with a cup of green tea. Quentin has already left, she said, without looking up from her phone. He has an early meeting. At 6 in the morning? I asked skeptically. Apparently so, she shrugged. Would you like some toast? I declined and sat down opposite her. Tanit, I heard your conversation yesterday. She froze for a moment but quickly regained her composure. It's not nice to eavesdrop, Barnaby. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was walking to the kitchen and heard you suggest sending me to a nursing home. She put down the phone and looked me straight in the eye. I'm thinking about what's best for our family. Quentin would never tell you, but he's having a hard time. We have our own plans, our own dreams. I don't want to get in the way, I said. If you need money for repairs or a trip. It's not about the money, she almost shouted, but then quickly regained her composure. I'm sorry, it's about space, about freedom. Quentin and I want a baby. We need this room. I can move out, rent an apartment nearby. Quentin would never agree to that. She shook her head. He's too attached to you. It's not healthy for a man his age to be so dependent on his father. Dependent? My son has been avoiding me for the last few months as if I were a leper. What dependence? I'll talk to him, I said, standing up. I don't think that's a good idea, Tanit replied quickly. He's very busy at work, stressed out about a new project. Don't burden him even more. At that moment, something clicked in my head. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Tanit had been systematically isolating Quentin from me. She had been creating a barrier between us, and she had done it so masterfully that even I, a former tax inspector, accustomed to seeing through lies and tricks, didn't notice it right away. I began to recall other moments, how she accidentally deleted my voice messages from Quentin's phone. Oh, I thought it was spam. How she interrupted our conversations, wedging in some urgent questions. How she planned their weekends so that Quentin didn't even have time for a short conversation with me. But why? What did she get out of it? The answer came a few days later when I accidentally overheard her phone conversation. I was sitting in the backyard with a book, and Tanith was pacing the patio, unaware of me behind the hedge. Of course, after Sybil died, everything went to him. I don't know exactly how much, but Quentin once let slip that it was about $3 million. They sold the house for $650,000, plus savings, plus insurance. She lowered her voice. No, he didn't make a new will, as far as I know. By law, everything goes to Quentin. He's the only child. And I'm Quentin's wife. She laughed, and that laugh chilled me to the bone. It was the cold, calculating laugh of someone planning a long-term operation. $3 million. She even knew the approximate amount. After selling the house, taking into account Sybil's savings and insurance, I did indeed have a decent amount of money. Not a huge fortune, but enough to ensure a comfortable retirement and leave a decent inheritance. Sybil had always been thrifty, and I was a cautious investor. I closed the book and quietly returned to the house. One thought kept running through my head. Tanit was waiting for me to die. Or more likely, she wanted to speed up the process by sending me to a nursing home, where I would naturally fade away from grief and loneliness. That evening, I noticed another disturbing detail. Quentin was taking some pills. What are those? I asked when he took a bottle out of his pocket. Just vitamins, he replied, quickly swallowing a capsule. Tanit says I'm stressed and deficient in everything. Have you seen a doctor? Tanit found a good alternative medicine specialist. Alternative medicine? Of course. I watched my intelligent, educated son gradually become an obedient puppet, and there was nothing I could do about it. Confronting Tanit directly would only make the situation worse. She would portray me as a senile old man trying to drive a wedge between husband and wife. I began to notice other worrying signs. Quentin became forgetful and apathetic. Sometimes he would stare at a single point, as if trying to remember something important. Once he forgot what day it was, and Tanit gently reminded him, as if he were a small child. Are you all right? I asked him when I managed to catch him alone in the garage. Yes, of course, he rubbed his eyes. Just tired. Lots of work. Those vitamins you're taking, are you sure they're safe? Tanit takes care of me, he replied with that special intonation that appeared when he talked about his wife, as if repeating a memorized phrase. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Something was happening to my son, and I couldn't just sit and watch. It was time to act. But how? Who should I turn to? The police? They would laugh at an old man who suspected his daughter-in-law of drugging his son with vitamins. And then I remembered Leighton. Leighton Hoff, my old friend from college, a retired lawyer. We hadn't spoken in several months since I moved in with my son. Tanit always found reasons to cancel our meetings, and then I just stopped suggesting them. Leighton wasn't just a friend. He was the person I trusted with the most complex legal issues. He helped Sybil and me draft our will. He knew everything about our finances and where our documents were kept. I decided to contact him as soon as I had the opportunity. I needed advice and possibly a plan of action. I couldn't let Tanit manipulate my son and wait for my death to inherit my estate. That night, I realized that I needed to outsmart Tanit at her own game. If she was playing the long game, so could I. Over the years working at the tax office, I had seen many scammers, swindlers, and manipulators. I knew how they thought. As I fell asleep, I began to think about a plan that would reveal Tanit's true intentions and save my son from her influence. I needed bait, something that would make Tanit show her true colors, and I already knew what it would be. Getting out of the house unnoticed was more difficult than I had expected. Tanit, like a guard dog, always knew where I was and what I was doing, but I was lucky. On Wednesday, she was leaving for some seminar on energy cleansing of space, or something like that. She usually took Quentin with her, but this time he had to stay home, an urgent project at work. As soon as her blue Volvo disappeared around the corner, I looked into my son's study. He was sitting in front of the computer, staring absently at the screen. Quentin, I need to go to Leighton's, I said, trying to sound matter-of-fact. Can you give me a ride downtown? My son turned slowly, as if he had just woken up. To Leighton? He asked. Why? I want to discuss some details of the will, I replied, watching his reaction. Something flashed in Quentin's eyes. Anxiety? Interest? Are you changing the will? He tried to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. No, I just want to clarify a few things. Sybil mentioned some kind of charitable trust, but I can't remember the details. Quentin visibly relaxed. I'd drive you, but I really can't leave the computer. Maybe I should call a taxi. I agreed, even though I could have walked. Leighton's office was only a 20-minute walk away, but I didn't want Quentin to warn Tanith about my visit to the lawyer if she happened to call. The taxi arrived 15 minutes later. The driver, a man with a thick beard and a worn cap, was unusually quiet, for which I was grateful. I needed to collect my thoughts before meeting Leighton. Hoff and Partners' office was located in an old brick building with tall windows. Leighton had long since retired from active practice, but he still had a small office in the firm he had once founded. Barnaby Paxton, he exclaimed, rising from his desk when I entered the office. What brings you here, old friend? Leighton had hardly changed since we last met. The same piercing blue eyes, neatly trimmed gray beard, tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. At 73, he looked younger than me. I need some advice, I said, shaking his hand, and maybe some help. Leighton pointed to the chair opposite him and pressed the intercom button. Pearl, bring us some coffee and don't disturb us for the next hour. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at me with professional attention. I'm listening. I began my story with the move to Quentin's, then described the gradual changes in Tanith's behavior, her attempts to isolate her son from me, the overheard conversations about inheritance, and the strange pills Quentin was taking. With each word, Leighton's face grew more serious. Are you sure about the pills? He asked when I finished. That's a serious accusation. I don't know what those vitamins are, I admitted, but I see changes in Quentin. He's become forgetful, apathetic. Sometimes he looks right through me, as if he doesn't recognize me. Leighton rubbed his chin. We can't accuse your sister-in-law of poisoning based on suspicion. We need proof. I know, that's why I came to you. I need a plan. The assistant brought coffee, black for Leighton with milk for me, He always remembered details like that. Do you have any ideas? Leighton asked, sipping his coffee. I have one. I leaned closer. I want to see if Tanit is really only interested in my money. I want to draw up a new will, or more accurately, pretend to draw one up. Leighton raised an eyebrow. Go on. I'll rewrite everything to Quentin. I'll pretend to be giving him my entire estate while I'm still alive. If Tanith is really waiting for me to die for the money, she should show her true colors when she realizes there's nothing left to wait for. And what do you expect? That she'll kick you out of the house as soon as Quentin gets the money? Exactly, I nodded. She considers me a burden. The only reason she tolerates me in the house is because she's afraid I'll change the will if they treat me badly. Leighton tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. Let's say you're right. Let's say she kicks you out as soon as she thinks they have the money. What then? Then we move on to plan B. We'll prove that she's manipulating Quentin, possibly even drugging him to control him. We'll challenge Quentin's legal capacity at the time the money was received. Leighton looked skeptical. Do you realize how difficult it is to prove incapacity, especially when it comes to your son, who appears to be functioning normally, goes to work? I know my business, I replied, but you know yours too. If there's a way to protect Quentin from this predator, you'll find it. Leighton sighed. Okay, let's look at your plan in more detail. You want to create a fictitious document transferring property. It has to look convincing enough for Tanith to believe, but it can't have any legal force. Exactly. We can draw up a deed of gift, but not register it, or prepare documents for a trust fund without actually transferring the funds. I nodded. The main thing is that it looks impressive. $3 million is enough to make Tanit lose her head. Leighton took out a notebook and began to take notes. We need to think through every detail. If Tanit is really as calculating as you say, she may suspect a trick. She's smart, but greedy, I said, and greed often blinds people. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the plan. Leighton suggested creating a document transferring the property that would look official, with seals and witness signatures, but would actually be invalid due to intentional legal errors. The most important thing is that your real assets are protected, Leighton emphasized. We have to make sure that Tanith can't access your real accounts and investments if our plan works and she shows her true colors. What do you suggest? Transfer most of the funds to an irrevocable trust with you as the beneficiary. Quentin will be named as the heir, but only after your death and under certain conditions. I thought for a moment. Won't that arouse suspicion? If she checks, she won't be able to check, Leighton said confidently. The information about the trust will be confidential. The banks will only see large sums being moved, which will fit with our story about transferring the inheritance to Quentin. We continued to discuss the details. Leighton was in his element, working out the legal intricacies, anticipating possible obstacles, and finding workarounds. I watched him with gratitude. At 76, there aren't many people you can rely on unconditionally. Leighton was one of them. Now for Plan B, Leighton said when we were done with the first part, if Tanith really kicks you out after the transfer of the inheritance, we need to be ready to act quickly. What do you suggest? Temporarily restricting Quentin's legal capacity through the courts. We'll claim that he's under undue influence, possibly even the influence of unknown drugs. We'll request a medical examination. The court may refuse, I pointed out. It may, Leighton agreed, but we'll have witness testimony about Quentin's sudden change in behavior, about how Tanith isolated him, maybe even recordings of your conversations. Recordings? I interrupted. Are you suggesting we record them? It would significantly strengthen our position, Leighton said cautiously, but I understand your reservations. Recording conversations in someone else's home without their consent? There could be legal issues as well as ethical ones. I rubbed my forehead. The thought of spying on my own son was unpleasant, but what if it was the only way to save him? Let's put that question aside for now, I said. First, let's see how Tanit reacts to the transfer of the inheritance. Leighton nodded. Reasonable, but we still need to gather evidence of Quentin's strange behavior. Photographs, witness statements, maybe even samples of these vitamins for analysis. I'll try, I promised, although I had no idea how to get the pills for analysis. Tanit was always there when Quentin took them. Leighton glanced at his watch. I have a meeting in 15 minutes. Let's summarize. We'll create a fictitious document transferring your assets to Quentin. At the same time, we'll transfer your real funds to a secure trust. You'll sign the documents in Tanit's presence and observe her reaction. If she shows her true colors, we'll launch Plan B. We'll go to court with a petition to have Quentin declared incompetent due to undue influence. I nodded. Right. When can we start? I'll have the documents ready by the end of the week. But Barnaby, Leighton looked at me seriously. You have to understand the risks. If we're wrong about Tanith, it could destroy your relationship with your son forever. What if we're right and we don't do anything? I objected. I'll lose my son either way. At least this way, I have a chance to get the real Quentin back. Leighton stood up and held out his hand to me. All right, I'm with you. But be careful. If Tanith is really as manipulative as you describe, she could be dangerous. I shook his hand. I worked for 30 years in the tax office, Leighton. I've seen my share of crooks and con artists. I can handle it. On the way back in the taxi, I thought about our plan. It was risky, that was true. But what else could I do? Watch Tanith slowly destroy my son? Wait until she sent me to a nursing home and gain complete control over Quentin and my money? When I got home, Quentin was still working in his office. He barely noticed my return, muttering something without taking his eyes off the screen. I looked over his shoulder. The monitor displayed some complex diagrams and lines of code. At least he was actually working, and not just pretending. How's Leighton doing? Quentin asked without turning around. Fine. We discussed my financial affairs. And what did you decide? There was curiosity in his voice. I'm thinking about simplifying everything. Maybe I'll transfer some of my assets to you now, so there won't be any tax issues after I die. Quentin turned to me, and for a moment I saw a flash of his former clarity in his eyes. Dad, don't say that. You still have many years ahead of you. Of course, I smiled, but it's better to be prepared. He nodded and went back to work. I left the office feeling a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. Somewhere inside this apathetic, distracted man was still my son, and I was going to get him back, whatever it took. In my room, I sat down on the bed and took out my phone. Leighton had sent a message. Starting work on the documents. Stay in touch. I replied with a short thanks and leaned back on the pillow. The plan was in motion. Now I had to wait and watch. An hour later, I heard Tanith return. Her bright voice echoed through the house. Quentin, dear, I have amazing news. April has invited us to spend the weekend at their country house. I tensed up. April was one of Tanith's friends whom I had never met but often heard about. They were influential women with mysterious sources of income and exotic hobbies. What about Dad? I heard Quentin's voice. Oh, he's a grown man, Tanith dismissed. He'll have a wonderful weekend on his own. Right, Barnaby? She looked into my room without knocking, with that special smile that never touched her eyes. Of course, I replied, trying to look indifferent. It's even good for me to be alone sometimes. See? Tanith turned to Quentin. Your father wants to spend time alone. That's normal at his age. At his age. As if I were 90, not 76. As if I were an incapacitated old man. Not a man who, until recently, had managed his own home, finances, and life. I was just telling Quentin that I'm thinking of transferring some of my assets to him, I said, watching Tanith's reaction. To simplify tax issues? Tanith froze, her smile widened, but something predatory flashed in her eyes. What a wonderful idea, she exclaimed. That's so progressive of you, Barnaby. I met with Leighton today. He's preparing the paperwork. Leighton Hoff? Your old lawyer friend? Tanith paused. He's retired, isn't he? Maybe we should find someone more modern. Leighton is still practicing, I replied calmly, and I trust him more than anyone else. Tanith pursed her lips, but quickly regained her smile. Of course, it's your decision. I just thought a younger lawyer might be more up-to-date on the latest changes in tax law. Leighton is aware of all the changes, I said. He's one of the best estate lawyers in the state. Tanith shrugged casually. Whatever you say. In any case, it's a very sensible decision to transfer the assets to Quentin now. Much more practical. Practical? For whom? I saw the greed flash in her eyes. Tanith was already spending my money in her mind. The documents will be ready by the end of the week, I said. Leighton suggested signing them in the presence of a notary at his office. Oh, that's so formal, Tanit drawled. Why not do it here at home? We can invite the notary over and have a little family celebration. After all, it's an important event. A family celebration about an old man giving away his money. Had I ever felt more used? Maybe, I replied evasively. I'll talk to Leighton. Tanith beamed. Wonderful. I can organize everything. A small buffet, champagne. There's no need to make an event out of it, I interrupted. It's just a legal formality. Of course, she backed down. But I could see that the idea of a celebration had not left her. Tanit fluttered out of the room, no doubt to tell her friends the news on the phone. I heard her excitedly saying in the hallway, "You won't believe it." I leaned back on the pillow and closed my eyes. The plan worked even better than I had expected. Tanit had taken the bait and was now hooked. All that remained was to wait for her to show her true colors. The next day, I called Leighton to tell him about Tanit's reaction. She's suggesting we have a family celebration with champagne, I said bitterly. Leighton chuckled. Not surprising. She's already spending your money in her mind. That's good for us. She'll be less cautious if she thinks she has victory in the bag. When will the documents be ready? By Friday. Do you want me to arrange for the signing to take place at the office or at your home? I thought about it. On the one hand, Leighton's office would be safer. On the other hand, if we wanted to see Tanit's true colors, it would be better to do it at home, where she felt comfortable and might be less cautious. At home, I decided, but without any unnecessary pomp. Just you, me, Quentin, Tanit, and the notary. Okay, I'll bring Diana Melrose. She's been with our firm for 20 years. She can be trusted. We agreed on a time, Friday, 6 in the evening. I felt a strange calmness as I made this decision. Perhaps because, for the first time in a long time, I was acting, not just reacting to Tanith's actions. The next few days passed in tense anticipation. Tanith was unusually kind to me, constantly asking if I needed anything, offering me tea, even baking my favorite apple pie. Quentin seemed oblivious to these changes, remaining in his usual half-asleep state. On Friday morning, Leighton sent a message. Everything is ready. See you tonight. I replied, I look forward to it. And it was true. I was really looking forward to this moment. The moment when the cards would be revealed, when Tanit's game would be exposed. But deep down, I was afraid. What if Leighton was right? What if our plan destroyed my relationship with my son forever? What if Tanit somehow outsmarted us? I pushed those thoughts aside. It was too late to have doubts. The wheel had already been set in motion, and it had to turn. The day of the signing was surprisingly sunny for late autumn in Spokane. The rays streamed through the curtains, creating intricate patterns on the living room floor. I sat in an armchair, watching Tanit bustle about, arranging glasses and laying out snacks on the coffee table. It's just a formality, I reminded her for the third time. You didn't have to prepare anything. Tanith gave me one of her fake smiles. But it's an important day for our family, Barnaby. We have to celebrate it properly. She was dressed in an elegant dark blue dress, her hair styled in an elaborate hairdo, and around her neck was a pearl necklace I had never seen before. It looked like she was getting ready for a social event rather than a home signing. Quentin, on the other hand, looked as if he had just woken up, even though it was almost 6 in the evening. In a crumpled shirt with a vacant stare, he sat silently on the sofa, occasionally rubbing his temples. Do you have a headache? I asked, leaning toward him. A little, he muttered. It's nothing serious. I gave him a pill, Tanit quickly interjected as she walked by with a bottle of champagne. It'll pass soon. I clenched my teeth to keep from saying something harsh. It would all be over soon. I just had to play my part until the end. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Tanit hurried to open it, and Leighton and Diana Melrose entered the house, a petite woman with piercing brown eyes and a neat briefcase in her hands. Good evening, Leighton greeted us, extending his hand first to me, then to Quentin. This is Diana Melrose, the notary who will certify our documents today. Tanit clapped her hands. How nice to meet you. Come in. Make yourselves comfortable. Would you like some champagne? Not now, thank you, Leighton politely declined. Let's get down to business first, then we'll celebrate. We gathered around the dining table. Diana took the documents out of her briefcase and laid them out in front of us. Leighton took a seat next to me, and Tanith sat so she could see every page I signed. This is a gift agreement, Diana began in a formal tone. Under this agreement, Barnaby Wesley Paxton transfers property and financial assets totaling $3 million to his son, Quentin Ellis Paxton. I noticed Tanith's pupils dilate at the mention of the amount. Her hand involuntarily twitched toward the pearls around her neck. The document consists of the main agreement and appendices detailing the assets being transferred, Diana continued. All pages must be signed by both parties and certified by me as a notary public. She handed me the first page and a pen. I pretended to read the text carefully, even though I already knew every word. Leighton and I had drafted this document together, carefully considering every detail. The fictitious contract was drafted to appear completely legitimate to a non-professional, but it contained legal errors that rendered it invalid. Is everything okay? Tanit asked, leaning toward me. Maybe you need glasses? My eyesight is fine, I replied, signing the page with a flourish. We methodically worked our way through the stack of documents. I signed, Quentin signed, and Diana certified. Tanit kept her eyes glued to the papers, as if afraid of missing some important detail. When we got to the appendix describing the bank accounts, Tanit couldn't resist. What is this account? Paxton Trust Manager? I didn't know about it. It's an old account I opened when Quentin was a child, I replied calmly. It holds investments I made for his future. How much is in there? Tanith tried to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in her voice. Almost $2 million, including capital gains over the years, I replied, watching her reaction. Tanith suppressed a sigh and squeezed Quentin's hand tighter. He just nodded absently, as if it were something insignificant. Very thoughtful of you, Mr. Paxton, Diana remarked, handing me the next page. I've always tried to secure Quentin's future, I said, looking at my son. He smiled faintly, but his eyes remained cloudy. Finally, the last page was signed. Diana gathered the documents, affixed the final seals, and handed the original to Quentin and a copy to me. Congratulations, she said. The transfer of assets is complete. Tanith could no longer contain herself. She jumped up from her chair and clapped her hands. That's amazing! Champagne! We definitely need to celebrate. She rushed to the coffee table, where a bottle stood in an ice bucket. I noticed Leighton and Diana exchange glances. Unfortunately, we have to go, Leighton said, standing up. Diana has another meeting today. Oh, what a pity, Tanit said, but her voice didn't express a shred of regret. Well, we'll celebrate as a family. I walked Leighton and Diana to the door. As he shook my hand, Leighton squeezed it a little harder than usual. Stay in touch, he said quietly. I nodded and closed the door behind them. When I returned to the living room, Tanit was already pouring champagne into glasses. Her movements were sharp and nervous. There was no trace of her former elegance. To a new beginning, she proclaimed, raising her glass. To the future that awaits us. Us, not me, her and Quentin. We drank. The champagne was expensive, but I could barely taste it. My attention was focused on Tanith, who was literally glowing with excitement. You know, I think we should celebrate properly, she said, finishing her glass in one gulp. Go somewhere for the weekend. Maybe Seattle or even San Francisco. Sounds good, Quentin muttered. Quentin, dear? Tanith turned to him, her voice suddenly soft and ingratiating. Why don't you go and relax? You've had such a stressful day. Quentin nodded obediently and staggered toward the stairs. I wanted to stop him, to say something, but he walked past without looking at me. As soon as he disappeared upstairs, Tanith's expression changed. The smile disappeared, her eyes turned cold. So, Barnaby, she paused, savoring the moment. I think it's time we discussed our future plans. What plan? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Now that Quentin has received his inheritance, there's no point in continuing this charade, she gestured around the room. We both know you're not needed here. I stared at her silently. She didn't even try to hide her true colors now that she thought she had achieved her goal. I found a great place for you, Tanith continued, pouring herself some champagne. Sunny Acres. It's a very respectable nursing home in the suburbs. They have everything you need. Nurses, entertainment, even a swimming pool. I'm not going to any nursing home, I said firmly. Tanith laughed. Oh, Barnaby, I don't think you quite understand the situation. This isn't your home anymore. Now that Quentin has the money, we make all the decisions. Quentin would never kick me out. Quentin does what I say. Her voice turned icy. He always has and always will. What have you done to him? I couldn't take it anymore. What pills are you giving him? Tanit raised her eyebrows in surprise. Pills? What are you talking about? I'm just taking care of my husband's health. That's all. He takes vitamins and dietary supplements. At his age and with his stressful job, it's necessary. He's like a zombie. It's not the vitamins. You're becoming paranoid, Barnaby. She shook her head with feigned sympathy. It's his age. Another reason why you're better off under professional supervision. I clenched my fists. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she admitted what she was doing to my son. But I held back. I had to see the plan through. When are you planning to send me to that house? I asked, trying to sound calm. I booked you in for next Monday, Tanit said, sipping her champagne. They just had a room open up. It's small but cozy, with a view of the park. What if I refuse? Tanit put down her glass and looked at me without a hint of a smile. Then I'll have to talk to Quentin about your condition. I'll tell him how you're becoming increasingly forgetful, how you accuse me of drugging him with some kind of pills, how you're becoming a danger to yourself and those around you. Are you going to have me declared incompetent? If I have to, she shrugged. But I hope it won't come to that. After all, we're family. She said the last word with such derision that it made me cringe. Family, I repeated. And how long have you been planning to get rid of me as soon as you got access to the money? Oh, Barnaby, don't take it personally. Tanith refilled my glass. It's just business. I invested 6 years in Quentin. 6 years pretending to be interested in his boring job, his nerdy hobbies, his unbearably proper life. I deserved compensation. You married him for his money. Of course. She didn't even try to deny it. When we met, Quentin seemed like easy prey. The only son of wealthy parents, insecure, craving attention. The perfect target. His mother was still alive then. And she was the main obstacle. Tanith nodded. Sybil saw right through me. She was a smart woman, if old-fashioned. But then she died so conveniently. Tanith paused, noticing the look on my face. Oh, don't look at me like that. I had nothing to do with it. Just a fortunate coincidence. I struggled to contain my anger. And you waited for me to die. I did. But you turned out to be surprisingly resilient, she smiled. And then you moved in with us, and I had to pretend around the clock. It's exhausting, you know. Poor thing, I hissed through clenched teeth. How you must have suffered. Tanit ignored my sarcasm. In any case, this charade is over now. We have the money, and you're going to Sunny Acres. Everyone gets what they wanted. Except Quentin. Quentin got me, she smiled smugly. Trust me, he's happy with this deal. I shook my head. He's under the influence of something you're giving him. It's not love, it's control. Call it what you want, Tanit shrugged. The result is the same. She stood up and looked at her watch. You have the weekend to pack your things. On Monday morning, a car from the nursing home will arrive. I'm not going anywhere. Tanith came up to me and leaned in, her face just inches from mine. You're going, Barnaby. Because the alternative is me calling the psychiatric clinic and telling them how you're delusional about me poisoning your son, how you're becoming aggressive and dangerous. She straightened up. Choose, voluntarily to the nursing home or forcibly to the mental hospital. I stood up, feeling my legs tremble. I'll call Quentin. He won't let this happen. Call him, she laughed. He's sleeping like a baby right now. I gave him sleeping pills with his champagne. He'll sleep until morning, and in the morning he won't remember anything you tell him. He never remembers. That admission was the last straw. You're a monster, I said quietly. Tanit lifted her chin. I survive in this world. I do what I have to do to get what I want. If that makes me a monster, so be it. She turned and headed for the stairs. Pack your things, Barnaby, and don't try to contact Quentin. It's useless. I watched her climb the stairs, an elegant, beautiful, and utterly heartless woman who had destroyed my son's life and was now trying to destroy mine. As soon as Tanith disappeared upstairs, I took out my phone and went out to the backyard. The night air was cool, but I hardly noticed it. My hands were shaking as I dialed Leighton's number. He answered after the second ring. "Barnaby, what's wrong?" "They took the bait," I said, trying to control my voice. "They took the bait and showed their true colors. We're going with Plan B." I briefly told him about my conversation with Tanith, her admission that she was giving Quentin some kind of medication, her threats to send me to a psychiatric clinic if I didn't agree to go to a nursing home voluntarily. "She's already found a place, Leighton. Sunny Acres. She signed me up for Monday." "Oh my God," Leighton exhaled. "She moved faster than we thought. Are you safe right now?" "For now, yes. She thinks I've accepted it and will pack my things." "Quentin is unconscious." She slipped something into his champagne. "You need to get out of there," Leighton said firmly. "Today, come to my place. In the morning, we'll file a petition with the court for temporary guardianship of Quentin and an investigation into Tanith's actions." "I can't leave him with her," I objected. "What if she does something?" "Barnaby," Leighton interrupted me, "you won't be able to help your son if you end up in a psychiatric hospital. And that's exactly what will happen if you stay. Tanith will get rid of you by any means necessary." I knew he was right. I had to leave in order to be able to fight. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll pack the essentials and come over." "I'll be waiting," Leighton said. "Be careful." I ended the call and slowly returned to the house. The champagne glasses were still in the living room, and the snacks that no one had eaten were scattered around. Traces of the celebration of my expulsion. I went upstairs and quietly walked past Quentin and Tanith's bedroom. The door was ajar, and I caught a glimpse of my son sprawled on the bed and Tanith talking on the phone, sitting at the dressing table. "Yes, everything went perfectly," she said in a quiet but excited voice. "The old man is already packing his things. They'll take him away on Monday. No, Quentin won't suspect anything. He never remembers. Of course, I'm sure. I've been doing this for 6 months." I quietly backed away and went to my room. I took out a small travel bag and began to pack the most necessary things. A few shirts, pants, medicine, documents. I put a photo of Sybil in my pocket, the only thing I couldn't leave behind. When the bag was packed, I sat down on the bed and glanced around the room where I had lived for the past 2 years. I came here, broken by grief after my wife's death, hoping to find comfort with my son. Instead, I fell into a trap set by a predator who used my son as bait for an inheritance. But now the game had changed. Tanith thought she had won, but in fact she had just lost everything. I quietly left the room, went down the stairs, and exited through the back door so as not to attract attention. Once on the street, I looked back at the house. Large, beautiful, with warm lights in the windows. A house that had never been my home. Clutching my phone, I walked away down the sidewalk. Tanith's last words echoed in my head. "It's over, old man. You're useless to us now. Get out." She was wrong. I wasn't useless. And I'll be back to save my son and punish the woman who tried to destroy our family. Leighton's house was in an old neighborhood of Spokane, one of those places where you can feel the history in every building. It was a 2-story Victorian mansion with an ivy-covered porch and a garden that Leighton tended himself despite his age. When I pulled up in a taxi, all the windows were lit, as if he had turned on every lamp in the house, waiting for my arrival. Leighton opened the door as soon as I stepped onto the porch. "Come in," he said, taking my bag. "I've prepared the guest room." Inside, it was warm and smelled of freshly brewed coffee. After a cold night walk and nervous tension, the smell seemed like a lifesaver. I sank into an armchair by the fireplace, feeling my hands tremble. "Have a drink." Leighton handed me a cup, but instead of coffee, it was whiskey. "You need to calm down." I took a sip. The alcohol burned my throat, but spread a pleasant warmth throughout my body. "You were right about Tanith," I said, staring into the fire. "She's even worse than we thought." Leighton sat down across from me. "Tell me everything in detail. We need to record every word, every detail of her behavior." I began to speak, trying to remember my conversation with Tanith word for word. Leighton turned on the tape recorder, asking clarifying questions from time to time. When I got to Tanith's admission that she was mixing something into Quentin's food and drink, Leighton's face darkened. "That's a criminal offense," he said. "Intentional poisoning for the purpose of control and financial gain." "She calls it vitamins and dietary supplements," I said with a bitter smile. "She says she's looking out for his health." We'll find out exactly what she's giving him, Leighton said firmly. But first we need to get you to safety and start the legal process of protecting Quentin. He turned off the recorder and put his cup on the table. In the morning, we will file a petition with the court for temporary restriction of Quentin's legal capacity on the grounds of suspicion of manipulation and poisoning. We will request a medical examination and toxicological analysis. At the same time, we will file a complaint against Tanit with the police. Quentin will resist, I remarked. He is completely under her influence. That's exactly why we need irrefutable evidence. Leighton nodded. Recordings, witness statements, test results. Something that cannot be ignored. I remembered Tanit saying on the phone that she had been doing it for 6 months, and Quentin didn't remember anything. What exactly was she doing? What drugs was she using? These thoughts made me break out in a cold sweat. I should have noticed sooner, I said, squeezing my temples with my hands. I should have intervened when I first noticed the changes in him. Don't blame yourself, Leighton put his hand on my shoulder. Tanita is an experienced manipulator. She was skilled at hiding her actions. But I'm his father. Bitterness spread through me like poison. I should have protected him. And you will, Leighton said firmly. We both will. But now you need to rest. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about Quentin. What he was like as a child. Curious, with an open smile and clear eyes. What he had become under Tanit's influence. Apathetic, with a cloudy gaze, a lifeless shadow of his former self. I remembered how Sybil worried about his gentle nature. People will take advantage of his kindness, she said. We tried to instill confidence and independence in him, and it seemed we had succeeded. Quentin got a good education and built a successful career. And then Tanith appeared, and all our efforts went to waste. She saw him as easy prey, a wealthy, lonely man craving love, and she began her game. Sleep came only in the early morning. Restless, intermittent. I dreamed of Sybil standing on the shore of the lake, calling Quentin, but he couldn't hear her, immersed in some kind of fog. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and sounds from the kitchen. Leighton had always been an early riser. When I went downstairs, he was already sitting at the table, looking through some papers. Good morning, he said, looking up. Coffee's on the stove, toast's in the toaster. I poured myself some coffee and sat down opposite him. What's this? I asked, nodding toward the papers. A court petition, Leighton replied. I've outlined the main points. Suspicion of intentional poisoning and manipulation for financial gain, a sudden change in Quentin's behavior and condition, your observations as a father, mine as a friend of the family. I looked over the document. It all looked convincing, but something was missing. We need evidence, I said. Specific facts, witness statements, medical reports. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Leighton put the papers aside and looked at me. We have several options. The first is to find witnesses to Quentin's strange behavior. Some of his colleagues, friends, or neighbors may have noticed the changes. I shook my head. Tanith methodically cut off all his contacts. First his friends, then his colleagues. He hardly talks to anyone but her. Then the second option is a medical examination. We need to get Quentin examined by an independent doctor and tested for psychotropic substances. But how can we get him to take the test? He won't agree voluntarily, and Tanit will do everything in her power to prevent it. Leighton tapped his fingers on the table. For that, we need a court order. And to get one, we need sufficient grounds for suspicion. It's a vicious circle, I sighed. Not exactly, Leighton leaned closer. There is a third way. We can start monitoring Tanit's financial transactions. I raised an eyebrow. How will that help? If she really believes she has access to your fortune through Quentin, she has probably already started spending it. Large purchases, money transfers, opening new accounts, all of these leave traces, and these traces can be used as evidence of her selfish motives. I thought about it. Tanit did seem very excited after signing the documents. She probably wouldn't waste any time. How can we check this? I have a friend at the bank where, as far as I remember, Quentin has his main account, said Leighton. He can't give us confidential information, but he can give us a general idea of any unusual activity. Is that legal? Leighton smiled. Not exactly. But I'm not asking for details, Just confirmation that something is going on. We'll get the rest through the courts. I nodded. Okay, what else? We need samples of those vitamins Tanit is feeding Quentin. If we can prove they are psychotropic drugs, the case will immediately become a criminal matter. But how do we get them? I don't live in the house anymore. Leighton paused, thinking about the question. Maybe we should try to contact Quentin directly? Call him, suggest a meeting? Tanit controls his phone, I shook my head. And after yesterday, she's probably turned him against me. She probably told him some story about how I went crazy and left. Then we'll have to go through official channels, Leighton decided. We'll file the application today and request expedited consideration. After breakfast, Leighton and I finished the application, gathered all the necessary documents, and drove to the courthouse. On the way, Leighton called an acquaintance at the bank and arranged to meet for lunch. Filing the application took longer than I expected. Despite all of Leighton's connections, we had to go through the standard procedure, fill out numerous forms, provide supporting documents, and wait for preliminary review by the judge. We headed to a small cafe near the bank where we were to meet Leighton's contact. I was so absorbed in thoughts of Quentin that I hardly noticed where we were going. Barnaby, Leighton's voice brought me back to reality. Look across the street. I looked up and saw Tanith coming out of a jewelry store. Even from a distance, I could see her beaming with delight. Around her neck was a new necklace that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. She's not wasting any time, I muttered. And that's good for us, Leighton remarked. The more traces she leaves, the easier it will be to prove her true motives. We went into a cafe and took a table by the window. Soon we were joined by a friend of Leighton's, an elderly man in a formal suit with a neatly trimmed beard. Randall, this is my friend Barnaby Paxton, Leighton introduced me. Barnaby, this is Randall Tugg, senior manager at First Northwest. We shook hands. Randall looked tense. Leighton, I can't disclose confidential customer information, he said immediately. It's against bank policy and the law. We're not asking for details, Leighton reassured him. Just a general idea of unusual activity that could indicate financial crime. Randall pursed his lips. Even that is a gray area. This is about my son, I interjected. His wife is manipulating him, possibly even giving him drugs to control him and gain access to my money. We have already filed a lawsuit, but we need additional evidence. Randall's expression softened. I understand your concern, Mr. Paxton, and to be honest, there are reasons for alarm. What do you mean? I tensed up. Randall looked around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Over the past 24 hours, there have been several large transactions on your son's account. Purchases at jewelry stores, designer boutiques, a down payment on a luxury car, and this morning there was an attempt to transfer a significant amount to an offshore bank account. An attempt? Leighton asked. Yes, Randall nodded. The transaction was suspended by the bank's security system for additional verification. Such transfers require the personal presence of the account holder and additional identification. Did Quentin come to the bank? I asked. No. Randall shook his head. A woman claiming to be his wife tried to make the transfer by power of attorney, but the power of attorney was not properly certified, and the transaction was rejected. Leighton and I exchanged glances. Tanit was acting even more brazenly than we had expected. She tried to transfer the money offshore? I asked. How much? Randall hesitated. I can't give you an exact amount, but it was substantial. Enough to interest the financial police? Leighton clarified. Randall nodded. More than enough. If the transaction had gone through, it would have automatically come under scrutiny. Randall, Leighton leaned toward him. If we obtain a court order to disclose information about Quentin Paxton's accounts as part of an investigation into possible fraud, will you be able to provide the full details? Of course, Randall nodded. With a court order, no problem. In the afternoon, Randall called. Mr. Paxton, she came to the bank again, this time with your son. With Quentin? I tensed up. How did he look? Not very good, to be honest, Randall's voice sounded alarmed. Pale, sluggish. He didn't seem to quite understand what was going on. What did they want? To withdraw a large amount of cash. But such transactions require advance notice, so they were refused. The woman was very unhappy, almost causing a scene. Did they leave? Yes, but she said she would be back tomorrow, and the money should be ready by then. Randall paused. Mr. Paxton, I shouldn't say this, but your son looked like he was under the influence of strong sedatives. I volunteered at a clinic for addicts, and I recognized the signs. This information was both terrible and valuable at the same time. Now we had an independent witness to Quentin's condition. Randall, would you be willing to testify? I asked. About seeing my son in that state? I... Randall hesitated. It could cause problems at work. This is my son's life, I said. Please. After a pause, he replied, Okay, if it goes to court, I'll tell them what I saw. When I relayed this conversation to Leighton, he perked up. That's important testimony. A bank employee is a reliable witness, and if he's willing to confirm that Quentin looked like he was under the influence of sedatives, that's a serious argument. Leighton and I spent the entire evening preparing for tomorrow's hearing, gathering and organizing all the evidence. I wrote down a chronology of the changes in Quentin's behavior, all the times I noticed him being sluggish, all the conversations where Tanith mentioned vitamins and supplements. Before going to bed, I stood at the window for a long time, looking at Spokane at night. Somewhere out there, in this city, was my son, drugged, controlled by a woman who saw him only as a source of money. The bitterness of betrayal overwhelmed me with renewed force. Not only Tanith's betrayal, she had always been a predator. It was her nature. But also my own betrayal. I couldn't protect my son. I didn't see the danger in time. Sybil would have noticed. She always saw through people, sensed the falsehood behind their sweet smiles. If she were alive, Tanith would never have been able to infiltrate our family so deeply. I clutched the photo of Sybil that I always carried with me. I'll fix this, I whispered. I promise you, I'll get our boy back. With that thought, I went to bed, determined to fight the battle that awaited me tomorrow. I knew it would be hard. I knew Tanith wouldn't give up without a fight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to win, and I was going to take full advantage of it. The day of the trial was cloudy. Low clouds hung over Spokane, threatening to spill rain at any moment. Leighton and I arrived at the courthouse an hour before the scheduled time to review the case files once more and prepare ourselves mentally for the battle ahead. Remember, Tanith will use any weapon she can, Leighton warned me as we sat in the small consultation room. She may accuse you of anything from manipulation to mental disorder. Do not rise to her provocations. Respond calmly and only to the questions asked. I nodded, trying to steady my trembling hands. The thought of seeing Quentin filled me with both hope and fear. What if he was so under Tanith's influence that he wouldn't even recognize me? What if he really believed her lies? What if Quentin doesn't show up? I asked. Tanith might say he's sick or busy at work. Judge Harrington insisted on his presence, Leighton replied. If Quentin fails to appear without a valid reason, confirmed by a medical certificate, it will be considered contempt of court. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, more like a hearing room than a real courtroom. Several rows of benches, a judge's bench, seats for the plaintiff and defendant. Everything was quite simple and functional. We took our seats and waited. 5 minutes before the hearing began, the door opened and Tanith entered, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit, obviously her lawyer. Quentin followed slowly behind them. My heart sank when I saw my son. He looked even worse than I could have imagined, pale with dark circles under his eyes, moving as if in a dream. His gaze was empty, unfocused, like that of someone under the influence of strong sedatives. Tanith, on the other hand, looked impeccable. An elegant suit, perfect makeup, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried herself with ostentatious confidence, but I noticed a nervous twitch in the corner of her eye. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw a mixture of hatred and fear in her eyes. She knew I was a threat to her plans and was prepared to fight to the end. Quentin didn't seem to notice me. He stared straight ahead, blinking from time to time as if trying to focus. All rise. Court is in session, announced the clerk, and everyone stood up. Judge Harrington, an elderly man with a sharp gaze and gray eyebrows, took his seat and looked around at those present. Be seated, he said. We are gathered here today to consider the temporary incapacitation of Quentin Ellis Paxton based on a petition filed by his father, Barnaby Wesley Paxton, alleging possible psychological pressure and abuse of trust by his spouse, Tanith Rebecca Paxton. This is a preliminary hearing to determine the need for further proceedings. He turned to Leighton. Mr. Hoff, please outline the substance of the application. Leighton stood up and began to speak, clearly, confidently, professionally. He outlined our family history, my move-in with Quentin after Sybil's death, the gradual change in my son's behavior under Tanith's influence. Then he moved on to specific facts, Quentin's systematic isolation from me and other loved ones, the strange vitamins Tanith gave him, his gradual sluggishness and forgetfulness. Your Honor, Leighton continued, we have reason to believe that Tanith Paxton systematically administered drugs to her husband that affected his cognitive functions and willpower in order to gain control over his finances. Once she believed she had gained access to a significant amount of money through a fictitious gift agreement, she immediately began spending on luxury items and attempted to transfer a large sum to an offshore account. Tanith's lawyer jumped up. Objection! These are baseless accusations without evidence. Overruled, the judge said calmly. Mr. Hoff is representing the applicant's position. You will have the opportunity to refute his statements. Continue, Mr. Hoff. Leighton nodded and presented our evidence to the court. My testimony about the conversation with Tanith, where she effectively admitted her motives, an audio recording of that same conversation, a timeline of changes in Quentin's behavior, Randall Tagg's testimony about Quentin's condition at the bank, and Tanith's attempt to transfer a large sum of money to an offshore account. When the audio recording was played, in which Tanith said that she gives him sleeping pills with champagne, and that he will sleep until morning, and in the morning he won't remember anything you tell him, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. I saw Tanith turn pale, and her lawyer feverishly took notes. Quentin seemed to show interest in what was happening for the first time. He turned his head and looked at Tanith with a long, uncomprehending gaze. Your Honor, Leighton concluded, we request that Quentin Paxton undergo a medical examination, including toxicological analysis, and that his legal capacity be temporarily restricted and his father, Barnaby Paxton, be appointed as his temporary guardian until the investigation is complete. The judge nodded and turned to Tanith's lawyer. Mr. Green, it's your turn. The lawyer stood up, straightening his jacket. Your Honor, all the charges brought against my client are absurd and baseless. Tanith Paxton is a loving and caring wife who has devoted herself to caring for her husband and his elderly father. It is Barnaby Paxton who shows signs of age-related mental changes, including paranoia and persecution mania. He accused me of trying to control the life of my adult son, of being unable to accept his marriage, of envying his happy family life. He called the audio recording taken out of context and possibly fabricated. As for Quentin Paxton's condition, the lawyer continued, it can be explained by overwork and stress from the conflict with his father. Yes, he takes sedatives, but they are prescribed by a doctor and with his full consent. The judge listened to both sides and turned to Quentin. Mr. Paxton, what can you say about the allegations? Quentin slowly stood up, holding on to the table to keep from falling. He took a long time to collect his thoughts as if trying to remember a memorized text. I trust my wife, he finally said. She cares about me. My father. He's old. He thinks. He fell silent, clearly losing his train of thought. His gaze wandered around the room until it settled on me. Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition? Doubt? Dad? He said uncertainly, as if he wasn't sure it was really me. Yes, son, it's me, I replied, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Tanith yanked Quentin's sleeve, forcing him to sit down. The judge frowned. Mrs. Paxton, don't interfere. Mr. Paxton, you may continue. But Quentin seemed to have lost his train of thought. He sat staring blankly ahead. The judge tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. Given Mr. Paxton's condition and the seriousness of the allegations, I consider it necessary to order a medical examination. Dr. Eleanor Reed will conduct an initial examination today, immediately after the hearing. A toxicological analysis will also be ordered. Tanith jumped up. Your Honor, my husband does not need an examination. He is simply tired and stressed out from these unfounded accusations. Mrs. Paxton, the judge said sternly, sit down. If you have something to say, speak through your lawyer. Tanith reluctantly sat down, giving me a look full of hatred. The judge continued. Pending the results of the examination, I am temporarily suspending the powers of attorney granted by Quentin Paxton to his wife and freezing all financial transactions on his accounts except for expenses for basic necessities. The hearing is adjourned until the medical report is received. All may leave. As we left the courtroom, I noticed Tanit's lawyer discussing something intensely with her. She looked furious, her mask of control beginning to crack. Quentin was walking beside them, but he seemed detached, as if what was happening did not concern him. Once he turned and looked at me with a long, uncomprehending gaze before Tanit pulled him toward the exit. "We won the first round," Leighton said quietly when we were alone. "But this is only the beginning. Tanit will fight to the end." "Quentin looks terrible," I said, my voice pained. "What did she do to him?" "We'll find out soon. Dr. Reed is an experienced specialist. She'll quickly determine if he's under the influence of any drugs." We waited in the hallway while Quentin was examined by the doctor in a separate room. Tanith was also waiting, pacing nervously back and forth, occasionally shooting me withering glances. Her lawyer was talking quietly on the phone, standing to one side. 45 minutes later, the office door opened and Dr. Reed emerged, a short woman with piercing eyes and a determined expression. "Judge Harrington," she said to the approaching judge, "I have conducted an initial examination and taken blood and urine samples for toxicological analysis. The results will be ready in 48 hours. However, I can already say that Mr. Paxton shows clear signs of sedation, characteristic of benzodiazepines or other psychotropic drugs. His coordination is impaired, his speech is slurred, and he exhibits cognitive sluggishness." "That's slander," Tanit exclaimed. "My husband is just overworked. He takes mild sedatives prescribed by his doctor." "May I see the prescription?" Dr. Reed asked. Tanit hesitated. It's at home. I can bring it tomorrow." "I would also like to speak with the doctor who wrote the prescription," Dr. Reed remarked. "What's his name?" Dr. Morris," Tanit said uncertainly. "Full name and contact details, please," Dr. Reed insisted. Tanit glanced at her lawyer, who shook his head slightly. "I'll provide that information tomorrow," she said. Dr. Reed turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I recommend immediate hospitalization for Mr. Paxton for detoxification and observation. His condition is cause for serious concern." Tanit turned pale. "No, that's not true. You can't just take my husband away." The judge raised his hand to stop her. "Mrs. Paxton, calm down. Dr. Reed, do you believe Mr. Paxton's condition requires immediate medical intervention?" "Yes, Your Honor. I suspect chronic sedative intoxication. Gradual withdrawal under professional supervision is required, otherwise serious complications are possible." The judge nodded. "In that case, I order Mr. Paxton to be admitted to Spokane Medical Center for detoxification and further examination. Mrs. Paxton, you are required to provide information about the prescribing physician and the prescription itself by the end of the day. Otherwise, I will be forced to consider this contempt of court." Tanit looked as if she was about to explode, but her lawyer held her by the arm and whispered something in her ear. She took visible effort to compose herself. "Fine, Your Honor," she said through clenched teeth. "I will provide all the necessary information." As Quentin was led out of the office to be taken to the hospital, he looked confused and frightened. His gaze wandered until it stopped on me. And then, for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of awareness in his eyes. "Dad," he whispered as he passed me, "what's going on?" "Everything will be fine, son," I replied, struggling to hold back the tears. "We'll help you." Tanita tried to go with him, but the judge stopped her. "Mrs. Paxton, you are not allowed to have contact with your husband at this time without the presence of medical personnel or a court representative." I, on the other hand, was allowed to accompany Quentin to the hospital, although I could not stay with him in the ward, only in the waiting room. As we rode in the ambulance, Quentin sat with his head in his hands. "My head is spinning," he muttered. "Everything is foggy." "It will pass," Dr. Reed assured him. "We will help you cleanse your body of the drugs they gave you." "Drugs?" He raised his head. "What drugs?" "We'll find out, Mr. Paxton," she said gently. "Right now, you need to rest." At the hospital, Quentin was immediately taken for tests, and I stayed in the waiting room. A few hours later, Dr. Reed approached me. "Mr. Paxton," she said, "preliminary tests show the presence of benzodiazepines and other sedatives in your son's blood at doses significantly higher than therapeutic levels. In fact, these are doses that can cause serious addiction and cognitive impairment. I felt anger boiling up inside me. Did she deliberately poison him? It looks that way, Dr. Reed nodded. The combination of drugs was chosen to cause lethargy, increased suggestibility, and amnesia, a classic pattern for manipulating a person. How long did this go on? Judging by your son's condition, at least 6 months, possibly longer. These drugs must be withdrawn gradually, otherwise there could be serious complications, including seizures and psychosis. How long will the detoxification take? From 2 weeks to a month, depending on the severity of the addiction, Dr. Reed replied. But in a few days, we will see an improvement in cognitive function as the level of drugs in the blood decreases. I was shocked. Tanit had been systematically poisoning my son for months, turning him into an obedient puppet. This went beyond simple manipulation. It was a real crime. The next day, a new hearing was held. Tanit was unable to provide either a prescription or the contact details of the doctor who allegedly prescribed it. Instead, she changed her tactics and claimed that Quentin had purchased the drugs himself to cope with stress and that she knew nothing about it. But the preliminary results of the toxicology report destroyed this version as well. Quentin's blood contained drugs that cannot be purchased without a special prescription, and traces of long-term use of sedatives were found in his hair. When this evidence was presented to the court, Tanit lost her composure. "It's all a lie," she shouted. "It's a conspiracy against me. Quentin loves me. He took those pills himself." Her lawyer tried to calm her down, but it was too late. The mask had slipped, and everyone saw her true face. Judge Harrington, observing this scene, made his decision. In light of the evidence presented and Mrs. Paxton's behavior, I ruled to temporarily restrict the legal capacity of Quentin Ellis Paxton until his mental and physical condition is fully clarified. His father, Barnaby Wesley Paxton, is appointed as temporary guardian. Mrs. Paxton is prohibited from any contact with her husband without the presence of a court representative or medical personnel. All financial transactions made after the signing of the gift agreement are deemed invalid and subject to cancellation. Tanit was furious. "You can't do that. The money belongs to us. I earned it." The judge looked at her sternly. "Mrs. Paxton, one more word and I will find you guilty of contempt of court. Furthermore, the case will be referred to the prosecutor's office for possible criminal prosecution for intentional poisoning and financial fraud." This blow silenced Tanit. She looked at the judge with hatred, but said no more. After the hearing, Leighton shook my hand. "Congratulations, Barnaby. We won the first stage. Now we need to focus on Quentin's recovery. And on returning the stolen property," I added. "Tanith has managed to spend a lot of money over the last few days." "Don't worry about that," Leighton reassured me. "Most of the purchases can be returned, and the transfer to offshore accounts never took place. The most important thing right now is Quentin's health. In the days that followed, I spent most of my time at the hospital, watching my son slowly come back to life. As the drugs were withdrawn from his system, Quentin became more and more aware and began to understand what had happened to him. It was a painful realization. When he realized that Tanith had systematically poisoned him, manipulated him, and tried to steal his inheritance, he fell into a deep depression. "How could I have been so blind?" he asked, staring at the hospital room ceiling. "How could I not have seen who she really was?" "She's a professional manipulator," I replied, sitting by his bed. "She chose you precisely because you are kind and trusting." "I loved her," he whispered. "At least I thought I did." "It wasn't real love, son. It was chemical dependency and psychological pressure. True love does not require control and submission." Quentin was silent for a long time, digesting this thought. Then he turned to me. "I'm sorry, Dad, for how I treated you, for letting her manipulate me." "You have nothing to apologize for." I squeezed his hand. "It's not your fault that you became a victim. The main thing is that you are now free from her influence." When Quentin was strong enough to testify, he told the investigators everything he could remember. His memories were fragmented due to the amnesic effect of the drugs Tanit had given him, but even that was enough to confirm our accusations. He remembered how Tanit first offered him vitamins and concentration-enhancing supplements, then gradually increased the dose until he became completely dependent. How she isolated him from his friends and colleagues, controlled his schedule, and checked his phone and email. This testimony, combined with medical evidence and testimony from other people, finally convinced the court that our accusations were valid. Judge Harrington ruled to completely annul the fictitious gift agreement, return all items illegally acquired by Tanit, and compensate for financial damages. Furthermore, the case materials were forwarded to the prosecutor's office to initiate criminal proceedings against Tanit for intentional poisoning, fraud, and psychological abuse. When news of our case reached the local press, other witnesses came forward. Neighbors who had seen Tanit treat me harshly when she thought no one was watching, Quentin's colleagues concerned about his sudden change in behavior, even Tanit's ex-boyfriend who said that she had tried to pull a similar scam on him, but he suspected something was wrong and broke off the relationship. Each new piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of her reputation and freedom. Tanith, who once seemed so confident and invulnerable, turned into a cornered animal, desperately trying to escape punishment. She changed lawyers, came up with new versions of events, tried to blame me and even Quentin. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the court ruled in our favor. On the day the final verdict was announced, Quentin, already much stronger but still pale and thin, sat next to me in the courtroom. He looked at Tanit not with hatred, but rather with the weariness and disappointment of a man who had finally seen the true face of the one he thought he loved. As the judge read the decision confirming all our accusations and fully rehabilitating Quentin and me, I saw a heavy burden lift from my son's shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he straightened up and looked ahead with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. We had won. Truth had prevailed. But the price of this victory was high. My son's health and mental balance. Years spent fighting the predator who had invaded our family. There was still a long road to recovery ahead. Not only physical, but emotional as well. Quentin had to learn to trust people again, overcome depression and guilt for allowing Tanit to manipulate him. But now we were together again, father and son, supporting each other. And I was ready to do anything to help Quentin return to a full life, free from manipulation and control. Quentin's rehabilitation took longer than we expected. His physical dependence on drugs turned out to be stronger than the doctors thought, and his emotional trauma ran deeper than we could have imagined. He spent 2 months in the clinic, where they helped him not only to remove all traces of the poisons Tanit had fed him from his body, but also to restore his psychological balance. I visited him every day. I sat next to his bed, read books he loved as a child, told stories from our past, reminding him of the time when we were a real family. Sometimes he listened attentively. Sometimes he fell asleep to the sound of my voice. On good days, we played chess or watched old comedies. On bad days, we just sat in silence, looking out the window at the changing colors of autumn in Spokane. Meanwhile, the trial against Tanit was gaining momentum. Leighton kept me constantly informed. The prosecution charged her with intentional poisoning, psychological abuse, fraud, and attempted misappropriation of property. Tanith hired an expensive lawyer, but even he couldn't refute the irrefutable evidence. Quentin's blood tests, audio recordings, witness statements. At the end of the second month of treatment, Quentin's psychiatrist, Dr. Palmer, asked me to stay after my visit for a serious conversation. "Your son is making significant progress, Mr. Paxton," he said as we sat down in his office. "Physically, he has almost fully recovered. But the psychological trauma is very deep. Quentin has experienced the ultimate betrayal by the person he trusted most. That doesn't just go away." "I understand," I nodded. "What can I do?" "The most important thing is to be there for him, but not to pressure him. Quentin is very vulnerable right now. He feels ashamed for allowing himself to be manipulated, guilty for how he treated you under Tanit's influence. These feelings will come back from time to time. But it's not his fault," I objected. "He was poisoned, manipulated." "He understands that rationally," Dr. Palmer nodded. "But emotionally, he doesn't. You have to be prepared for a long recovery with ups and downs. It's important that Quentin has a safe space to recover." "I'm thinking about buying a new house," I said. "A place where there are no memories of Tanit." "That's a great idea," Dr. Palmer agreed. "A fresh start in a new place can be very therapeutic." I took his advice to heart. Over the next week, I researched the Spokane real estate market and selected a few houses that seemed suitable. Not too big, but cozy with a garden and a nice view. When I showed the photos to Quentin, he showed active interest in something for the first time in a long time. "This one, with the terrace and river view, looks nice," he said, pointing to one of the photos. "How many bedrooms does it have?" 3, I replied. One for you, one for me, and one for guests. Or for your office, if you want to work from home. The day of discharge coincided with the final hearing in the custody case. Judge Harrington reviewed all the evidence, including medical reports and doctors' recommendations, and made his final decision. Based on the evidence presented and expert opinions, he announced, the court rules that the temporary custody of Quentin Ellis Paxton, previously established, is extended for the period of rehabilitation, approximately 6 months, with the right to extend or terminate early depending on medical indications. Barnaby Wesley Paxton is appointed as guardian. I felt relieved. This decision gave Quentin time to recover without worrying about financial and legal issues. In addition, the judge continued, the court grants the motion to invalidate the gift agreement, which was entered into under the influence of manipulation and deception. All assets specified in this agreement are returned to the ownership of Barnaby Paxton. I heard a sharp gasp from Townet, who was sitting in the dock surrounded by guards. This day was a double blow for her. In the morning, the jury found her guilty on all counts in the criminal case, and now she was losing all rights to the inheritance and the house. And finally, the judge looked directly at Townet. Given the severity of the crimes committed by Townet Rebecca Paxton against her spouse, the court grants the petition for divorce on the grounds of cruel treatment and intentional infliction of bodily harm. Townet Paxton is deprived of any property acquired during the marriage and is obliged to compensate for the damage caused by her actions. After the hearing, as Quentin, Leighton, and I were leaving the courtroom, a security guard caught up with us. Mr. Paxton, he said to me, the defendant is requesting a brief meeting with you before she is sent to the detention center. I exchanged glances with Leighton. It's not necessary, he said quietly. You can refuse. I thought about it. What could Tanith possibly say to me that would matter after everything she had done? On the other hand, this might be my last chance to put an end to it once and for all. All right, I agreed, but not for long. The guard led me into a small conference room. A few minutes later, Tanith was brought in. She looked haggard, her makeup unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes, and the designer suit she had worn to court hung on her like a coat hanger. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Barnaby, she said, sitting down across from me. Her voice sounded unusually sincere. What do you want, Tanith? I asked wearily. She folded her hands in front of her. I know that you and Quentin will never forgive me, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know. She paused as if searching for the right words. I really cared about Quentin, in my own way. I raised an eyebrow. By poisoning him, by turning him into a puppet, is that what your caring looks like? I know how it sounds, she said quietly, but at first I really loved him. He was kind, caring, successful. Then, I don't know what happened. Maybe Sybil's death and your move in with us changed the dynamic. Maybe I saw an opportunity to get more than just a stable marriage. And you decided to speed up the process by pumping him full of drugs. I finished for her. Tanit lowered her eyes. At first they were just sedatives. He was so tense after work. Then I saw how they affected him, made him more obedient. And I continued. I looked at her, trying to see even a hint of sincere remorse, but all I saw was regret that her scheme had been exposed. What do you want from me, Tanit? I asked bluntly. Forgiveness? Recommendations for a lighter sentence? She raised her head, and for a moment, her eyes flashed with their former calculation. I thought maybe if you talked to the prosecutor, said you didn't want a harsh punishment for me. I shook my head. You haven't changed, Tanit. Even now, you're trying to manipulate me. No, I won't ask for leniency. You'll get what you deserve under the law. No more, no less. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Barnaby, her voice trembled, I'll be in prison for 8 years. By then, I'll be almost 50. My whole life. You should have thought about that before poisoning my son, I said. Goodbye, Tanit. I hope you find a way to atone for your sins, at least to yourself. I left the room feeling that I had closed an important chapter in our lives. Tanith no longer had any power over us, either legal or emotional. Quentin was waiting for me in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. What did she want? He asked. She asked me to put in a good word with the prosecutor. She wanted me to ask for a reduced sentence. And did you? I refused, I replied simply. You can't let manipulators continue to manipulate, even when the game is lost. Quentin and I moved into a new house, with a view of the river, spacious rooms, and nothing to remind us of the past. The first few weeks were difficult. Quentin often woke up at night from nightmares, sometimes fell into apathy, and could sit for hours by the window, looking at the river and not saying a word. I tried to be there for him without imposing myself. I cooked his favorite meals, suggested activities we could do together, but never insisted if he refused. Gradually, he began to thaw. At first, it was small steps, helping with dinner, suggesting a game of chess, asking if I wanted to take a walk to the river. A month later, he mentioned returning to work for the first time. I talked to Roland, he said at breakfast. He suggested starting with part-time work, working from home a couple of days a week. That's a great idea, I agreed. If you feel ready. I'm not sure, he admitted. But Dr. Palmer says structure and routine will help. And I miss work, actually. I saw this as a good sign. The desire to return to professional life meant that Quentin was beginning to look to the future rather than dwelling on the past. 3 months after the move, based on Dr. Palmer's reports, the court lifted Quentin's legal incapacity. He was once again able to fully manage his finances and legal affairs. When Leighton brought us the documents, Quentin looked both happy and scared. This doesn't mean I'll stop supporting you, I assured him. I'll always be there if you need help or advice. I know, Dad, he smiled weakly. It's just strange to be an adult again, fully responsible for myself. That evening, we sat on the terrace watching the sunset over the river. The air was fresh, with the light scent of pine trees growing at the edge of our property. I've learned a lot these past few months, Quentin said unexpectedly, about myself, about people, about how easy it is to lose yourself if you're not careful. Me too, I admitted. I've learned not to take love and intimacy for granted, to see the warning signs, to trust my intuition. Quentin nodded. Mom saw right through Tanit from the first time she met her, didn't she? Yes, I smiled, remembering. Sybil always sensed insincerity. That girl doesn't see you as a person, she sees you as an ATM, she told me after my first dinner with Tanit. I should have listened, Quentin sighed, but I was so caught up, so sure I knew better. We all make mistakes, son. I looked at him. What matters is not that you fell, but that you found the strength to get back up. We were silent, watching the last rays of the sun paint the river gold. Do you think we'll ever be able to trust people again? Quentin asked quietly. After everything that's happened? I thought about it. Tanit's betrayal had left deep scars on both of us. Quentin had lost his wife and his faith in his ability to judge people. I had lost years of my life with my son and nearly lost him. Was it possible to open up to the world again after that? I think we'll be more careful, I replied. More careful about who we let into our lives. But to shut ourselves off completely from people is to let Tanit win, even from prison. Quentin thought about my words. You're right. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in fear. I don't want to see every person as a potential manipulator. Balance, I said. The wisdom lies in finding a balance between trust and caution. We fell silent again, each lost in our own thoughts. There was still a long road to recovery ahead of us. Tanit had inflicted deep wounds that would not heal quickly. But sitting here on the terrace of our new home, with my son by my side, I felt hope. For the first time in a long time, I could look to the future without fear. The river flowed before us, relentless and strong, overcoming all obstacles in its path. Just like Quentin and me, betrayal had taught us to value true loyalty. Loss helped us understand what was truly important. And although I knew I would never forgive Tanit for what she had done to my son, I was grateful for the lesson I had learned. Family values cannot be taken for granted. They must be cherished, protected, and defended, even if it means going through pain and betrayal.